We all live inside of our bodies, and part of that aspect is illness. Part of that aspect is getting older. Part of that aspect is giving birth, sex, all of that. And so I could bring something, about living in a body with chronic illness and to some extent disability. My experience with Cushing's disease and Addison's disease has a lot to do with how you present. There's a lot of weight gain, weight loss, and so that intersects with how society treats you based on how you look.
That was Martha Grover, today's guest on Everybody Podcast. She's a writer and artist living here in Portland, Oregon, and shares her story of living in a chronically ill body. She is a self-proclaimed spoonie, and if you don't know what that means, well, you are soon to find out. I'm Daria Matza, and I am so glad you're here. We're approaching the end of Season 1 of the podcast, and I've been looking over all of the episodes and asking myself, what conversations are missing? What haven't we talked about yet? And what came up was chronic illness and disability. So let's get started with my conversation with Martha. Will you tell us a little bit about your story of finding out you had a chronic illness?
I did not find out I had a chronic illness, first of all, because there's a huge distinction between acute illness and chronic illness. So I started out on the acute. And the acute is this narrative that we all hear and accept in that because we love those get better and move on with your life stories. So an acute illness would be cancer, would be a cold, right? A chronic illness is something like arthritis, right? Like it's never going to get better. So I started out with something called Cushing's disease, and now I have, which is an acute illness, and unfortunately a lot of people die from it. It's something you have to get cured if you don't want to die. And then now I have something called Addison's disease, which is a chronic illness that there's no cure for, but you can manage just like type 1 diabetes. So it's still like there's still a danger that you can die from complications, but it's much different than Cushing's disease.
Tell us a little bit about the story of being
sure.
in your body.
Sure. Yeah.
What was happening in your body,
yeah.
And then you were like...
Right. Okay. So I am 37 now. And I was diagnosed with Cushing's disease about 10 years ago. And at the time, I was working at a grocery store. I worked for about 6 years at this grocery store. So I was working with my body. My body was what I used to, everyone does to some extent, but I was doing a physical job. And I started gaining weight. And of course, that's the worst thing that can ever happen to you as a woman. So I kind of freaked out and decided I was going to go to start working out. And I'm not into sports. I'm not into physical activity. And it was like a really, foreign world for me. But I was determined to lose this weight, So I started working out, and I was working out every day. And I broke my ankles. I got stress fractures in both my ankles. I did not know what was wrong with me because I hadn't done anything that would make me get these stress fractures. So I got treatment for those. I took a week off work. They healed. I went on with my life, right? But I was having these back problems. So I went to a chiropractor, and she said, well, maybe your legs are 2 different lengths. You should go get an x-ray. So I went an x-ray, and the radiologist said, by the way, you have tons of kidney stones and you have osteoporosis. So then I decided, then I realized, oh, that's why my ankles broke from not really doing anything, So then it was a battle. I ended up going to a couple different doctors. The first doctor I went to was a primary care physician that I had seen my entire life. And he basically told me, well, she shrugged his shoulders. He says, we may never know why you have osteoporosis. And it was very defeating for me. So I don't know, on a whim, I just wrote down all the symptoms I was having on this piece of paper, and I tacked it on my little board above my desk in my apartment, and I didn't think about it. And it was such things as my hair is falling out, I'm gaining weight, I have kidney stones, osteoporosis, my period has stopped, all these other different things, pain, trouble sleeping. And I just, it seems, weird now looking back that I would just write down all these symptoms and just tack them on a board. But I did. That's what I did because I was defeated. And I had a friend who was studying to get her master's in public health, and she was in town, and she was working on her thesis, and she knew I lived alone. And she said, hey, can I use your apartment to do my thesis while you're gone at work? And I was like, okay. And then I came home one day, and she literally had torn the list from the bulletin board and came up to me and was like, what the fuck is this? What what is this?
Yeah.
And I said very bashfully, oh, those are my symptoms. And she's like, you need to go to the doctor. And I was like, well, I'd already gone to the doctor, you know? So finally I found another physician and I brought in that list and I came kind of armed with this, you know, list, and she got me tested, and basically my cortisol levels, which is the main indicator of Cushing's disease, were like through the roof. And then I was able to get in touch with an endocrinologist and go from there. And it was a 2-year period though before I was finally cured of Cushing's, and the cure was getting my adrenals out. A lot of people are able to just remove a tumor on their pituitary, which is what causes Cushing's, and that's how they're cured. But I traded too much cortisol for no cortisol because that was the only way to basically save my life at that point. But I went on an experimental drug test. I had multiple surgeries. So that was kind of my journey with that.
Yeah. I'm curious how, two parts. How did you feel in your body during that time?
Yes.
And then how was the public reacting to you as your body changed?
Yeah. So through research of my disease, I've figured out that I probably had Cushing's from a young age, but I had something called cyclical Cushing's, where the tumor on my pituitary would blast out these hormones and then subside. So I would lose a lot of weight and then I would gain weight, and I lose weight and gain weight.
This is like kind of your whole body history.
Yes. Yeah. And not have my period. And, you know, I've also found out I had very low estrogen. So like I was, you know, to be totally straightforward, I was a little asexual really because of the hormonal imbalances. And also a lot of psychological symptoms like anxiety and depression. And it's hard to say that I was in denial about what was going on with me, but I feel like if it's the way you've always known your body to be is somewhat out of control and your emotional state out of control, you start to take that on as your quote-unquote personality. And when I lost a dramatic amount of weight when I was about 22, I got a lot of positive affirmation from men, from friends, and I never thought, oh, something's really wrong with me. I stopped having my period and I'm having like horrible diarrhea every day and I'm crying every day and I can't get out of bed, but like I'm thin, so everything's great. It was only, you know, and it feels awful to say that like the reason I sought treatment was that I was gaining weight. The reason that, you know, because
it wasn't problematic when it was in the reverse way.
Yeah, it was in the reverse way, you know. So in my body, I think, you know, as I think more about it and I look more back at it, the psychological problems were probably where the most suffering resided, you know.
Were you a dieter as a kid or?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, I've listened to your podcast a lot, and like, you know, our relationship with food and our relationship with our bodies always like, what is that inventory, you know? Yeah. And I would say that I grew up with 6 sisters, which I think is really, you know, interesting because you're always kind of comparing your body to your sisters, which can be bad, but also it's just the way it goes, you know, it's just going to happen. And my mom, I remember my mom going on a couple diets when I was a kid, but it was never really overt. It was just, you know, we live in a society where that's just in the air. And so that's what it was, you know? And so I don't think that it was necessarily overtly negative, but it was just, that's the culture we live in,
right?
You know, and comparing yourself to your sisters and like, you know, so there was I think there's a lot of alienation that comes along with being the only 6th sister, you know, because you want to relate, but like, I don't have my period, you know, like, or I can't have kids, or I can't do exercise or do these other things, you know, and so there's community, but there's also isolation in that. So, yeah.
Oh, how did your body feel, I guess, when you were at the grocery store after the ankle breaks, still gaining weight? Like, how was that experience?
Well, I really wanted to bring up this one writer that I really love. Her name is Joanna Hevda, and she wrote an essay for Mass Magazine called Sick Woman Theory, and she talks about how the bodies of women that are in chronic illness and pain are sites of resistance. And what she means by that, well, what I think she means, is that, you know, when we talk about disability, when we talk about chronic illness, it's in resistance to the systems that we live in, right? It's in opposition to the systems that we live in, because often how we define the very word disability is your ability to work, right? It's not your ability to make a ham sandwich or give someone advice or it's always in the realm of capitalism, right? So as an injured person or as a sick person, it's really, the tables turn when you're in a work situation. And my job at the grocery store, everyone was very, very supportive. But there's also going to be those people that think you're faking it or you're not pulling your weight. And it's this kind of like boot camp mentality almost, and I think on some level capitalism is abusive. When we talk about body size, it's in the context a lot of times of not being able to find clothes that fit us. Right. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing wrong with our body, but we're coming up against this system, within a context. So,
yeah. I mean, it brings up for me like airplane seat size.
Right. Right.
I think this is a good place to talk about kind of some words.
Yeah.
And I know we want to talk about Spoonie. So what words do you feel like you claim or identify with?
Well, I do think that I am disabled, although I still work. I have gotten, and this is the tricky part, is because I've, gotten money from the federal government for a period of time where I couldn't work. So, I do think that I'm disabled, but I don't necessarily claim it as an identity. Definitely, I'm in the chronic illness community and known as shorthand as Spoonies, which I don't know if, everyone knows that.
Probably not.
So I made some notes, but basically the spoon theory was written by a woman named Christine Miserandino in 2003. And as a writer, I really love the story of how that came about because the spoon theory is a metaphor. And I love metaphors, and metaphors are very useful. And that is why the spoon theory is really taken off and how people now, I'm a spoonie, because it really helps to translate the experience of chronic illness to someone that is not chronically ill. Mm-hmm. So how it came about was that she was having lunch with a friend, and they were at a diner, and she was trying to talk about her experience. I think she had lupus or has lupus, with lupus. And she grabbed 12 spoons. I think maybe it represented 12 hours a day, but it's 12 spoons, basically. She laid them out, and she said, these spoons represent the energy I have in a day. And let's say, sorry, I bumped the mic. Let's say one spoon is getting out of bed. Another spoon is showering and making yourself breakfast. And so if you do too much, you're out of spoons for the day, and you're not going to do anything with the rest of the day. And it really shows for people that don't have those limitations how you have a limited amount of energy that day, and how are you going to choose to spend it. And ironically, even thinking about that could be a spoon. Mm-hmm. Even thinking about how am I going to do all these things I need to do is zapping your energy. And, if you look it up on Wikipedia, if you look up spoon theory on Wikipedia, what I really thought was interesting is they also made the point, some people with disabilities use a spoon to pass as able-bodied. That requires energy to hide your disability because maybe you're not in a safe space where people are going to understand that. And so it's complicated, but it's not complicated because it's a really easy metaphor. And I love those kind of things that can spread those ideas in a digestible manner, because being a person with chronic illness can be very isolating. And those metaphors are little boats going out to sea, to use another metaphor, to help people understand, and I think that's why it's been really valuable for a lot of people. So, yeah.
I feel like there's definitely an important intersection with talking about bodies and spoonies I've seen on Instagram and stuff. Being in the world and not having that known.
Yeah.
How have you do you have any stories or experiences you can share about that?
So I talk about that in my first book. In my first book, One More for the People, I had, the doctors told me that, I would be able to go to grad school. And they didn't want me to lose hope because I got in this horrible diagnosis that I wouldn't be able to go to grad school even though I wasn't cured yet. And I had gotten a full ride scholarship, and I had to delay that. But looking back on it now, I can't believe that I moved to San Francisco. I was full on Cushing's disease. And when I was down there, I didn't have a car. And I had to get around the city, and I was on public transportation. And I also want to preface this by saying that it's a privilege to pass in a lot of ways, right? It's a total privilege. Most people will not look at me and think that there's anything wrong with me. If someone knew about Cushing's, they might look at my body and say, you're either very stressed out or on steroids because of the way that I hold my weight, right? But for the most part, I look like a quote unquote normal person. But on days that I was in so much pain, I would use a cane. And there was a huge difference in the way people treated me if I used the cane. And so then I realized, especially on public transportation, like, maybe I'm just going to use the effing cane today because people aren't going to give me the evil eye if I sit in the disabled seat, right? You know, or don't give up my seat to someone, you know, because I'm in so much pain that I really don't want to stand. And I actually got injured on a bus because someone fell into me, and because of the muscular stuff that goes on with Cushing's, I tore a muscle in my thigh, and just because someone had fallen on me because I was standing up, right?
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, it's real. It's just all this like guilt and shame and like weird stuff that goes on that you just have to like deal with, you know, and like bring yourself into your power, which I feel like is something that, you know, has been a journey for me, like coming into your power. I think acceptance is really big, and like accepting where you're at and accepting like, no, I really am in pain.
Right.
Like I'm 28, but like I have brittle bones and I'm in pain. Yeah. So like I need to accept that. And it's really hard to accept, and it's a journey, but it's like the stages of grief, you know, it's like you got to get to the acceptance before you can come into your power and then love yourself unconditionally.
I think there's like this interesting polarity, I guess, between you feeling so bad and then the world like telling you look great. Did your family or people?
Yeah. So when I lost a lot of weight in my early 20s and I didn't know yet that I was sick, it was, I've noticed a lot of attention from men, but it was also like creepy attention, you know, on a higher level. And I won't go into some of the details, but it was like very jarring. But I did, because it was like a brief period of time, it was probably about a year that I was, you know, very thin. I don't think I didn't accrue a ton of that, but basically it was like, no one was telling me, you know, Martha, you know, this is bad. Like a couple of my sisters were like, you seem like you've lost a little bit too much weight. Like, what are you eating, you know? But that was it, you know, it didn't really come from anyone else but my sisters, you know? At the time, because I'm a snot, I was like, you're just jealous.
Yeah.
Which is horrible.
Yeah.
Which is horrible that I would think that their concern was like, well, you're just jealous. You know, right. I actually never told them that. That's what I thought. But that was a thought that went through my head. Yeah. And that shows me now, like, that's super messed up.
Yeah. Yeah. What about attention you got when you were starting to gain a lot?
One thing that, you know, you've talked about a lot is you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? So when I would complain about gaining weight, people would say, you haven't gained that much weight. You're not that fat. You know, one thing I tell people a lot about getting diagnosed with Cushing's disease is that I'm lucky because my main catalyst was the osteoporosis and the breaking of my ankles because I hadn't really gained that much weight. I ended up gaining quite a bit weight, but at that point I hadn't gained that much weight. And people that present as, you know, just an overweight person or an obese person, according to the doctor, they complain about all these other things that are going on with them and they don't get diagnosed. So I'm lucky that my primary symptom was my bone condition versus a large amount of weight.
People, I'm sure there's endless stories out there of people going to the doctor and being like, oh, you're just fat, go on a diet.
Oh, you're just fat. You're just fat.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not sleeping. I'm crazy anxious. I'm sweating uncontrollably. Like all these things like, oh, you're just fat. And it usually takes on average about a decade for people to get diagnosed with Cushing's disease.
Wow.
Because of fat phobia, number one. And people say it's very rare. Well, it's rare. I think it's totally underdiagnosed. I think it's completely underdiagnosed. Is that one of the main
symptoms is rapid weight loss or weight gain?
Usually weight gain because most people don't have cyclical Cushing. So once the tumor turns on, it just stays on and goes. But mine, and it's, you know, because I still have the tumor there, they weren't able to get it out. I get my hormones tested and it'll go up and it'll go down, it'll go up and go down. So that's just the way my tumor works. And I'm just recently like writing an essay called Why I Didn't Name My Tumor. Because a lot of people like name their tumor when they get Cushing's and they name it like mean things like asshole or, but it goes back to like the radical self-love.
Yeah.
And it's going to make me emotional, but basically, you know, my tumor's part of me. Cushing's disease is only your body trying to protect you because if your body is creating all this cortisol, what it thinks or whatever, you know, what metaphor you want to use for it, that it's under attack. So all the things that happen to you are only the body trying to protect you. You want to get that weight because it's a famine. There might not be food. You don't lose your period because you're under attack, it would not be a good time to have a baby.
Right.
You know, and
so the wisdom there is really To like drop into that for a minute is really powerful.
Yeah. And so, you know, I get a newsletter from the Cushing's Foundation. I'm not hating on the Cushing's Foundation. I think they're a great organization, but they have patient stories. And it's all that acute illness narrative before and after. I conquered the world kind of, and that, you know, that's a lot of why like people with disabilities, you know, are like, don't call me inspirational. You know, because this is my life and this is just like, what's the alternative? Not living, you know, like that's inspirational to you that I don't kill myself. That's insulting. Right. But that feeds into these patient stories. And it's a very othering kind of experience to watch these, you know, these narratives, which I'm really glad they're doing better. I'm glad they don't have Cushing's anymore. But these before and after pictures are one small subset of people that have chronic illness. You know, maybe the before and after picture wouldn't look that different for me. You know, like I look pretty much the same, like maybe a little bit healthier, but really.
Are the before and after pictures in those settings usually like they're passing when they're after?
Well, they've been cured usually from the Cushing's, but it's usually a bigger person and then a smaller person.
Oh, it's a weight thing.
Oh, it's totally a weight thing. Yes, that's totally a weight thing. And I just reject that.
Yeah.
I reject that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's just not an indication of health, how big you are. So
yeah, you're making me think a little bit about one of my guests who was talking about the effects of stress and cortisol on your health, which is, am I right to understand that the Cushing's weight gain piece is that your body is gaining weight to protect you against all the stress?
Well, it's like, okay, so if you know, our brains are layered brains, and our little pituitary is right in the center. So evolutionary speaking, it's like our lizard brain. You know, it's responding to threats that it doesn't understand, right? So if your body is just being deluged with the cortisol, you know, it's thinking, oh my God, you're stressed because there's a war, or you're stressed because there's a tiger, or there's a famine, or so let's gain weight so that because there's food scarcity and that's why you're stressed. And so I'll have that in bad times. And then also an interesting thing is that with Cushing's, you gain your weight mostly around your midsection. And that's another aspect of the body saying the internal organs are the most important. We're going to protect them.
Interesting.
Right? You usually have thinner arms and legs, and most of your body weight is on your around your midsection, and that is a stress pattern weight gain. But it's your body trying to protect you.
So interesting.
Right? And so for me, like really learning to love my body is, even though that was something that I definitely needed to take care of, wanted to live, it was an act of love of my body.
Yeah.
From my body, trying to protect me.
Yeah.
You know?
That's powerful.
It's totally powerful. Yeah, and that's really helped me a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you feel like, I want to talk more about some other elements of what has brought you to like being more at peace in your body, but was that a big part of it, like kind of getting to the
and also something we were talking about before we turned the microphones on is that there's always this idea a lot of times with everyone, not just with Cushing's patients, but that I want to get back to the quote unquote real me. And I think really letting go of that was huge for me. You know, it was like, there is no real me. The real me is me now. Today.
Right.
That's the real me. And because once you get on steroids, I'm steroids dependent now. It's, you have to accept a certain level of like out of controlness because, you know, you get sick, you have to take extra steroids, you might gain some weight, you're out of commission all the time, you can't exercise, you know, basically you feel a lot out of control, to be honest. So before I kind of came to this realization about not chasing this real me, I got a referral from my doctor to a nutritionist. And I see the look on your face like, oh no, but she was amazing.
No, I'm like, is it going to be good or is it going to be bad?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, it was life-changing. She sat me down and said, why are you here? And I said, I want to lose weight. And she said, you look fine to me. What do you eat? I told her what I ate. She goes, that sounds fine to me. And then she's like, tell me about why you're here more, you know? And so I told her my story, and pretty soon, immediately, crying my eyes out. And she hands me, you know, it's always like out of nowhere comes a box of tissues. Here you are, you know, I'm prepared for this. And that was the first step to get from a medical professional saying, you're okay. There's nothing wrong with you. And so now what's the problem now? The problem now is that you just need to accept where you're at right now.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. And so that was really huge. And she's really one of the few medical professionals that have ever really talked real with me about that. I've gotten a lot of like fat phobia and like weird stuff from other doctors, but she was amazing and I'm really thankful to her. Thanks, Jackie, wherever you are.
Go, Jackie. Go, Jackie.
Yeah. And see, the thing is that when I realized I had cyclical Cushing's, you know, before that, I wanted to get back to the real me, which was like this underweight 22-year-old. That's ridiculous. That was very sick, very ill. And like, I just don't think there is such a thing as the real me. The real me is right now, you know, and just coming to that realization, you know, how do I live, not to be super Oprah, but how do I live my best life now, you know, like in the moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were some of the things you did with her or in other ways to come to terms with that?
To be honest, nothing. I think I saw her 2 more times, and that was it. Because she's like, your eating habits seem fine. Like, you just need to change your mindset. You know. So, and then it was a lot of, you know, your last guest, Shiloh George. She talked a lot about spiritual practice, and because I'm a writer and an artist, that has really helped me a lot. Just like investigate that stuff, and I'm really into science and biology, and like looking at different organisms and different animals and how they correlate or don't correlate with our sense of self. Like I'm writing an essay right now called The Starfish. And, you know, if you cut a starfish in half, it'll grow into 2 different starfish. And so that's always been really fascinating to me and thinking about, you know, we have these ideas of ourselves as individuals and selfhood. But when you have a disease that yourself is attacking yourself, I feel like that's an abusive way to frame it. People always talk about the battle with cancer and like all this stuff, and it's very oppositional. And I know this is kind of meandering, but basically, like,
you're not meandering.
Yeah. It's like we even think about our skin as like the border of our selfhood, but like things go out of our skin and into our skin. We have a porous membrane. We are walking in a sea of other organisms that come in and out of us, and so I feel like when we really realize that the field is wide open to define what the self is, I get to define what my self is. You know, like if we believe in heaven and a soul, like then we look at the starfish and it can become 2 different organisms. Like that's mind blowing.
Yeah.
You know, and so I get to decide.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not only like you have to blow this idea of selfhood and what the real selfhood is and all this wide open, and then you can actually bring it back and say, these are my boundaries. This is my autonomy. This is my power, because you're letting all these other metaphors define you,
right?
You know, like the germ is the attacker, and I'm putting up the self-defense of my immune system, and you know, all these things. These are just metaphors,
right?
Like losing the battle with cancer. Like it's such a horrible thing to say.
Yeah.
Now you're a loser,
right?
What?
Yeah. Thank you. Ugh. That's so good.
It's not in your control. That's the thing.
It's so good to think about how we are positioning language in our world right now that's like creating systems, you know, and creating the ways we view the society we're in. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, it's the unfortunate thing with disease is that most of the time you're not in control of it at all. So putting a metaphor around it that is somehow like trying to control it. And that was like the deal with naming my tumor. I was like, I wasn't going to name my tumor because that is isolating it and making it somewhat digestible. But what's happening to me is incomprehensible to me.
Right.
So I'm not going to do it.
Today, how do you experience your body?
Well, I've had doctors tell me that I never should have gotten my adrenals out. And the reason is that they still had hope that I would be cured of Cushing's without getting my adrenals taken out. But I was at a point where I just needed to do it, and I was getting sicker and sicker, and I needed to do it. So I'm going to get to your answer.
You're allowed to get
to your question. So now I have this chronic illness that is managed through medications, but it's very imperfect. I always try to compare it to type 1 diabetes because it's similar in some ways. However, so many people have diabetes, type 1 and type 2, that it's profitable for drug companies to come with technology that you can test your blood sugar, you can do all these things. Well, I don't have that. There's no way for me to test my cortisol. I just am taking a pill and hoping to turn out okay. So the doctors didn't want me to get my adrenals out because now I have this, complicated disease that I have to manage, almost on my own. But because a lot of people end up in the hospital with something called an adrenal crisis. So if I got in a car accident, you had me take my dog tag off earlier before we got started, but I have to wear a dog tag that basically says like, if I'm in a car accident, I'll just pass out because I don't have enough adrenaline to compensate, right? So I'll go into shock and pass out, right? So that's a big danger. Because
adrenaline, I need some
so the context is that cortisol is slow-acting stress hormone that everyone needs to live, right? Adrenaline is converted from cortisol into adrenaline by your body. So that's quick-acting, right? So that's something that your body...
you don't have the slow one. You just
I have both. But because I don't have any adrenals, if I got into a car accident, my body would use the available cortisol to go into adrenaline, but then there wouldn't be any backup coming in from the adrenals, right?
I see.
So in an emergency, or if I got really sick, or even I've heard people go into adrenal crisis because they found out an emotional thing. Like they found out someone was very sick in their family or died.
Have you had any experiences?
Well, that's where I'm getting to, right? Okay, so the doctors did not want me to get my adrenals out because people are hospitalized all the time. It's like really bad, But I have never, from the 7 years that I've had my adrenals out, I've never had an adrenal crisis. Why is that? Because I'm constantly monitoring how I feel. And that is the price that I pay for not going into adrenal crisis, and fortunately not getting into a car accident. But, the price I pay for always thinking about how I feel every moment of the day, wondering if I should rest, wondering if I should take more cortisol, wondering if I should eat something. It's like one of those spoons of my, go back to the spoon. Like a spoon of my day is just keeping track of how I feel. And some people decide, I don't want to use that spoon today. And they may end up in the hospital. So you don't really win.
Yeah, right.
I have a friend who asked me, do you ever get time off? No, I never get time off.
Do you feel like you're very in tune with your body then?
Yeah, and it feels like a burden. People are like, get in touch with your body. And I'm like, I am so in touch with my body.
Right. And it's exhausting.
And it's exhausting.
Right. There's this idea, I think, like even in the body positive community, that like when you're in touch with your body, you're like in this bliss and you love yourself and it's all is good. But you're in touch with your body is work.
Yeah, it's work. It's something I have to do every day. Yeah, for sure. It's not like a luxury. And
is there any follow-up questions coming to me is there any feeling of medication talking to you, or like does it all feel like your body? Like when you're thinking about this is how I'm feeling, is that the steroid medication I took? Is that
Yeah.
Or does
totally.
it all...
I'm on like 15 medications, so it's a constant like, what's this? I'm having this symptom. What is going on because of that symptom?
And do you feel like you're teasing out like this is my body talking to me and this is like medicine? Or is it all one?
Oh, it's all one.
Okay.
Yeah, because I basically have no working endocrine system. So it's pretty much always goes back to my endocrine stuff. What's really been, aside from like I have to check in with my body all the time, it feels like work. What has been very helpful for me is that the mind-body connection, because like I said, like Cushing's and Addison's also has psychological impacts as well with anxiety and depression, because you don't have enough cortisol, you're low energy, you feel depressed, you have too much, you're like totally anxious. Everyone knows what roid rage is. My family certainly does. Nervous energy, sweatiness. So it's had a huge toll on my mental health. But meditation has been very helpful, and that's something my therapist talked to me about. I have been diagnosed with PTSD because if you scan someone's brain with Cushing's and you scan someone's brain that went to war and has PTSD, they'll be look like the same brain, because I wasn't in war, but my body thought I was. Right. So a lot of my healing has been letting go of some of because when you're so stressed out, but there's no real reason why you're stressed out, you're going to come up with reasons.
Right.
Right? So I would create a lot of stuff in my head to make me, and I'm not going to get into it, but make me equate the stress I was feeling with something that had happened to me. And that created a lot of negative energy in my life. So part of my healing process has been meditating and unraveling a lot of that and letting it go. And it feels so good to just say, hey, that's why I was coping.
Yeah.
But it's not true. Like, my thoughts aren't true. That's okay.
Right.
I'm having a thought, but it doesn't mean it's reality.
Right.
So I identify with a lot of like OCD characteristics, PTSD characteristics, where you're just under a ton of stress and you're trying to, like, why am I feeling this way? And coming up with a usually wrong reason. Like someone hates me.
Right.
Or that was really a mean comment when it's not.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about your work, your creative work.
So I've written 2 books that were published by a small print in publishing house here in Portland called Perfect Day Publishing. And my second book was a finalist for the Oregon Book Award last year in creative nonfiction. And they're not primarily about my illness, but it kind of seeps into every aspect of my life. So if you like humorous essays, if you like family memoir, you will like my books. But a lot of it has to do with just like the daily grind of trying to live as someone with a chronic illness, especially within our healthcare system, having like different jobs, dating people, what that's like. So for me, if I want to go out dancing or stay out late, I have to take extra steroids to do that so that I can actually dance,
Yeah.
And really, But the problem is because, again, I don't have like a way to minutely measure this. I just guess and take a pill.
Yeah.
And if I take too much, then I sweat a ton. So
I can see where this is going.
And I kind of knew this guy that I had gone on a first date with before through friends, and we're still friends. He's like a mutual friend. But I said to him, just so you know, I might be really sweaty. And then I was, it's like, how do you manage that? Like, I want to be honest and like have this disease, but it's like not super sexy, but like I want to have a good time.
Right.
So
That's
yeah.
funny.
Yeah. And also too, like, I just want to say, like, if you are newly diagnosed with a chronic illness or something like a weird health condition, people care a lot less than you think they're going to care. They really don't. And it's like a double-edged sword because you're like, oh, I told you that already. You don't remember that? But like, people just, they're going to accept you for the most part. Right. I've found, but it's very scary when you're first like trying to go out there and date and your body's changed a ton and how are people going to receive me? And I found that most of the time people exceed your expectations on that.
Good.
What I would say is that community is really, really important. If you're someone that's been newly diagnosed as someone with a chronic illness or acute illness, community is very important. However, it does have its limits. Just because someone has a chronic illness doesn't mean they're going to necessarily be helpful to you.
Right.
I am privileged that I can pass, right? There's a lot of things that I have no idea about what it's like to be with any other condition. And I think right away people go, well, I'm the same as you. And it's like just saying anyone of a certain race is the same or anyone that's a woman is the same. It's like everyone's going to have their different experiences. And one thing I've walked away with is that, and this may seem like a very fine point, but I really want to get people away from saying that they're blinded by their privilege. You can't use ableist language to describe privilege. Privilege is privilege. It's not a disability. Privilege is not a disability, right? Privilege is a power. Use it. Don't be ashamed. If you're in a position of privilege, get out there and advocate for people that aren't in that privileged place. Don't say that I just don't know, I'm an idiot,
Yeah, that's so interesting. The language of blinding. Oh my gosh.
No.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, can't do it.
Thank you for joining me today. If you liked the show, please take a moment to head over to iTunes and give us a review. Those reviews bring more people to the show, and I truly appreciate it. I started the show talking about what's missing from the conversations we've been having here. Do you have any ideas? Please get in touch and let me know your ideas, because this podcast is for everybody.